It all started with a dead tree. Or, to be more precise, it started with the woman who believed a dead tree in my front yard was a personal declaration of war against her beige-colored world. Before the letter, before the chainsaws, before the police, and the impromptu founding of a new religion, there was just me, a cup of rapidly cooling coffee, and a sense of profound, bone-deep satisfaction. I had done it. I had escaped. No more shared walls thrumming with my neighbor's questionable taste in techno at 2 a.m. No more hunting for a parking spot that wasn't half a mile and a prayer away. No more the faint, ever-present scent of mystery curry in the hallway. I had traded it all for this, a modest 3-bedroom ranch house in a neighborhood called Harmony Meadows. The name alone should have been a red flag the size of Texas, but I was blinded by the American dream of a lawn I could call my own. This particular morning, the sun was casting long shadows across that very lawn, a carpet of green so perfect it looked like it had been rendered by Pixar. A synchronized ballet of sprinklers kicked on across the street. It was quiet. Almost too quiet. I was a 32-year-old graphic designer who'd spent his entire adult life in the glorious, chaotic symphony of the city. This silence was unnerving, like the moment in a horror movie just before the jump scare. My gaze fell upon the centerpiece of my front yard, the oak tree. When the realtor, a woman with unnaturally white teeth and a vocabulary consisting entirely of superlatives, had shown me the place, she'd called it a majestic, mature oak. She had conveniently omitted the dearly departed part. The tree was, without a doubt, completely and utterly dead. Its branches were a gnarled, skeletal claw reaching for the sky, stripped of any leaf or life. But I liked it. It had character. It was dramatic. I envisioned a cool, Gothic-style birdhouse hanging from one of its limbs, maybe some wind chimes. It was a project for another day, filed away in the mental cabinet labeled "Stuff to do when I'm done unpacking the 87 boxes of junk I somehow accumulated." I took a final sip of my coffee, feeling the smug contentment of a man who had successfully adulted. I owned land. I had a mortgage. My biggest problem was a dead tree. Little did I know, the tree wasn't the problem. The tree was just the battlefield. Strolling to the end of my driveway, I retrieved the mail from the ridiculously quaint HOA-approved mailbox that was identical to every other mailbox on the block. Bills, junk mail, a pizza coupon, and one crisp, cream-colored envelope. It felt heavier than the others, both in weight and important. The return address simply read, Harmony Meadows Homeowners Association. Embossed on the flap was a crest featuring 2 manicured shrubs and a rising sun. I slid it open with my house key, a strange knot forming in my stomach. Inside, a single sheet of thick paper, unfolded with a snap. The text was printed in an elegant, merciless font. The air in Harmony Meadows always seemed to be held at a perfect 72 degrees, even in the thick of summer. It was a place engineered for pleasantness. The lawns were uniformly lush, the houses painted in a palette of approved soul-crushingly neutral tones, eggshell, taupe, gracia, and the ever-daring hint of sand. Every Tuesday was trash day, and by 8 a.m., every bin was placed perfectly perpendicular to the curb. It wasn't a neighborhood, it was a simulation of one. My house was my sanctuary from this oppressive perfection. Inside, My walls were a chaotic collage of posters, my furniture was a comfortable hodgepodge of styles, and there was a healthy layer of dust on most surfaces that I affectionately called my laissez-faire approach to housekeeping. I worked from home, designing logos and websites for companies that wanted to look disruptive and authentic, words that meant absolutely nothing in Harmony Meadows. My morning ritual was simple: coffee, email check, and 10 minutes of staring out my backyard window, congratulating myself on my escape from apartment life. The backyard was my private kingdom, enclosed by a 6-foot privacy fence. The front yard, however, was public domain. It was the face I presented to the world of synchronized sprinklers, and its dominant feature was the monolith of deceased wood. The oak was a giant. Its trunk was thick and deeply grooved, a roadmap of a life lived long and well. Even in death, it had a presence. It stood there, defiant and stark against the baby blue sky, a piece of authentic, untamed nature in a sea of artificiality. My neighbors probably saw a corpse. I saw a sculpture. That morning, after admiring my wooden giant, I performed the daily ritual of the suburban homeowner, the walk of shame to the mailbox. I shuffled down my driveway in my slippers and a ratty t-shirt, a stark contrast to my neighbor, Mr. Henderson, who was already out trimming his hedges with what looked like surgical precision, wearing khaki shorts and a polo shirt. He gave me a tight, forced smile and a nod. It was the universal suburban greeting that said, "I acknowledge your existence, but please don't let your property value dip and affect mine." I waved back, grabbing the small handful of envelopes. And there it was, the cream-colored envelope. It looked like a wedding invitation, but it felt like a summons. The paper was so thick it could have stopped a small-caliber bullet. The HOA crest, with its smug little shrubs, seemed to mock me. Back in my kitchen, I poured another cup of coffee, setting the envelope on the counter as if it were a live grenade. I circled it for a moment. What could it be? A welcome basket coupon? A schedule for the annual neighborhood potluck? My brain, conditioned by years of city living where the only authority was a landlord you could ignore until he sent a certified letter, couldn't fathom the true nature of the beast. Finally, with a sigh, I tore it open. The language inside was a work of art, a masterpiece of passive aggression honed over generations of petty tyrants. The letter began with a deceptively pleasant salutation. "Dear resident." It didn't use my name. I wasn't a person. I was a property number. On behalf of the Harmony Meadows Architectural Control Committee, this notice serves to inform you of a compliance issue observed at your property located at 124 Willow Creek Lane. A compliance issue? I'd only been here a month. I hadn't even had time to break any rules. I'd been a model citizen. I put my trash bin away on time. I didn't park on the street. I hadn't even had a housewarming party yet. I read on, my eyes scanning the dense paragraph of legalese. As per the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, Article 7, Section 4, Subsection C, Landscaping and Flora Aesthetic Standards, all properties must be maintained in a neat and aesthetically harmonious condition. It has come to our attention that a deceased tree is currently located in the front-facing portion of your lot. This constitutes a violation. My majestic oak, my beautiful gnarled giant. They were talking about my tree. This, the letter continued, and I could practically hear the sneer in the ink. Aesthetic blight, is not in keeping with the established standards of our community. Furthermore, it represents a potential hazard from falling limbs or instability. Aesthetic blight? I said aloud to my empty kitchen. Lady, you should have seen my last apartment's fire escape. This tree is a work of art compared to that. And a potential hazard? The only thing it's in danger of falling on is my own empty driveway. The tree had weathered decades of storms. It wasn't going anywhere. The final paragraph was the hammer blow, delivered with the same polite, sterile cruelty. You are hereby required to have the tree professionally removed within 14 days from the date of this notice. Failure to comply will result in a fine of $50 per day until the violation is rectified. We appreciate your prompt attention to this matter in our collective effort to maintain the beauty and value of Harmony Meadows. It was signed, Sincerely, Carol Perkins, HOA President. The name itself sounded like it came with a disapproving frown and a perfectly pressed pantsuit. 14 days. A $50 a day fine. For a tree that wasn't hurting anyone. I laughed. It was a genuine, disbelieving laugh. This had to be a mistake. A simple, overzealous welcome to the neighborhood gesture. I'd just call this Carol Perkins, explain that I was new, that I'd get to it when I could, and we'd have a chuckle about it. Oh, the sweet, beautiful innocence of the uninitiated. I folded the letter, placed it on the fridge under a magnet shaped like a slice of pizza, and thought, well, that's a problem for tomorrow, Leo. I had websites to design. I had a whole new world of suburban tranquility to enjoy. I had no idea that the letter wasn't a suggestion. It was a declaration. And Carol Perkins was already massing her troops on the border of my perfectly manicured, soon-to-be disputed territory. The war for Willow Creek Lane had begun. My phone call to the HOA's main number was about as fruitful as trying to reason with a brick wall. I was met with a chipper, pre-recorded voice that directed me through a labyrinthine menu of options before I was finally able to leave a voicemail for the committee, which I was assured would be reviewed at their earliest convenience. Unsurprisingly, my earliest convenience and theirs were on two different cosmic calendars. Days ticked by. I received no callback. My relaxed annoyance began to curdle into a low-grade anxiety. The 14-day deadline was approaching like a freight train. My only option, according to the HOA website, was to address the board directly at the monthly meeting. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a building so profoundly beige it seemed to absorb all personality from those who entered. The air inside was thick with the scent of stale coffee and self-importance. About 15 residents were scattered amongst rows of metal folding chairs, facing a long table where the 5 board members sat like a tribunal judging the fate of fallen souls. And in the center, a woman with a helmet of perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a powder blue pantsuit was Carol Perkins. She ruled the room with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. Her smile was a work of surgical precision, a slight upward curve of the lips that conveyed no warmth whatsoever. I listened for 20 minutes as they debated the most monumentally trivial issues with the gravity of a UN Security Council session. There was a heated 7-minute discussion about whether holiday lawn inflatables could be put up one day before or on the day of Thanksgiving. This was followed by a passive-aggressive presentation by the treasurer about residents who were, and I quote, chronically tardy with their quarterly dues. Finally, Carol announced the open forum for residents. My moment had come. I walked to the podium, feeling like I was about to defend my doctoral thesis. Good evening, I began, trying to sound as reasonable and non-threatening as possible. My name is Leo Hansen. I live at 124 Willow Creek Lane. I'm new to the neighborhood. Carol's smile tightened a fraction of an inch. Welcome to Harmony Meadows, Mr. Hansen. We're so glad to have you. How can we help you maintain community standards tonight? The veiled jab was not lost on me. Right. Well, I received a notice about the large oak tree in my front yard. I explained the situation calmly. I was still unpacking. I hadn't budgeted for a major expense like tree removal right after buying the house, and the tree was perfectly stable. I'm not disputing that it's dead, I conceded. I'm just asking for a reasonable extension. Maybe 60 days? That would give me time to get quotes and save up. Carol listened patiently, her head tilted in a pantomime of deep consideration. When I finished, she folded her hands on the table. Thank you for bringing your concerns to us directly, Mr. Hansen. It shows a commitment to the community. I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe she was reasonable after all. The glimmer was promptly extinguished. However, she said, her voice dropping into a tone of gentle, condescending finality, the bylaws are not suggestions. They are the bedrock of our community's harmony, and more importantly, our property values. The 14-day period is standard for all such violations. An extension, I'm afraid, is out of the question. I stared at her, dumbfounded. But it's just a tree. It's not hurting anyone. A dead tree is a broken promise, Mr. Hansen, she said, the bizarre metaphor hanging in the air. It suggests neglect. It creates a negative impression that can spread through the entire neighborhood. If we grant an extension for you, we must grant one for everyone. That is a path to chaos. Broken mailboxes, unkempt lawns. Where does it end? I wanted to say, it ends with people living their lives without being lorded over by a suburban dictator. But I bit my tongue. I could feel the eyes of the other residents on me. I was being made an example of. The new guy, learning his place. I see, I said, my voice tight. I'm sure you'll find a way to resolve the issue in a timely manner, she said, her smile returning at full force. Now, next item on the agenda. The unacceptable shade of beige the Millers used on their shutters. Brenda, do you have the paint swatches? I walked back to my seat, my face burning. The war was on, and I had just lost the first battle. Defeated and fuming, I decided to just bite the bullet. Fine, I'll remove the stupid tree. How much could it possibly cost? I spent the next morning calling local tree removal services, my naivety about to receive a brutal, expensive education in the realities of homeownership. My first call was to a company I found on a hastily designed flyer, Shady Steve's Tree Service. A gravelly voice answered on the third ring. Yeah? Hi, I'm looking to get a quote for a tree removal. How big? Pretty big. It's a dead oak, maybe 20-25 feet tall. A long pause, followed by a whistle. Gonna be pricey. Where you at? I gave him my address. He said he was in the area and would swing by. 30 minutes later, a beat-up pickup truck that looked like it had lost a fight with every tree he'd ever cut down rattled to a stop in front of my house. Steve, a man who was 90% tattoos and cigarette smoke, got out, squinted at the tree, and scribbled a number on the back of a greasy napkin. $750, he grunted. Cash, up front. I can do it next Tuesday, around 3 a.m. Less disturbance that way. The price was tempting, but everything else about the exchange screamed, I will take your money, and you will never see me again. I politely declined. My second call was to the opposite end of the spectrum. Corporate Cutters, Inc. A crisp, professional receptionist answered. They sent out a certified arborist named Kyle, who arrived in a shiny branded truck and a polo shirt tucked into his chinos. He walked around the tree with a clipboard, making thoughtful noises. "Okay, Mr. Hanson," he said, tapping his pen on his clipboard. "So, we're looking at a full removal, stump grinding, and haul away. Given the proximity to the house and the overhead power lines, we'll need our specialized crane rig and a 4-man crew. Safety is our #1 priority, of course." He did some calculations on a tablet. My blood ran cold. He finally turned the screen to me, a proud smile on his face. The quote was for $5,280. I think I actually laughed out loud. $5,000? For one tree? Does that include a complimentary golden axe and a team of lumberjack supermodels? Kyle did not find it amusing. "That is our standard rate for a high-complexity extraction, sir. We are fully licensed and insured." "I'm sure you are," I said, taking the printed quote. "I need to sit down and discuss this with my financial team." My financial team consisted of me, my laptop, and a bottle of cheap whiskey. The third and final quote came from Chad's Tree and Stump. Chad was a young, painfully earnest guy who spent 20 minutes giving me a detailed lesson in arboricultural physics. "See, the way the main leader branches have desiccated, you can't just fell it conventionally," he explained, pointing with gusto. "You get unpredictable fracturing. What you need is a surgical dismantle. We'd have to rig each section, make the relief cut here, then the final drop cut here." He was a nice kid, but his quote was still $3,500. I thanked him, my spirit thoroughly crushed. I couldn't afford any of them. The HOA fines would start in 5 days. I was trapped. I was going to lose this war and go bankrupt over a dead piece of wood. That evening, I sat on my front porch, nursing a beer and staring at my 2 nemeses, the unmovable oak tree and the second notice from the HOA, which had arrived that day. This one was printed on red paper. The friendly tone was gone, replaced by bold, underlined text about liens and legal action. I felt utterly defeated. Carol Perkins had won. I'd have to drain my savings or take out a loan to pay some guy named Kyle an obscene amount of money to destroy my beautiful, sculptural tree. Dejected, I went inside and opened my laptop. Intending to lose myself in work, I was browsing through design inspiration websites, looking at logos and branding, when I clicked on a random link in a blog post. It led me to an article titled, "The Surprising Art of Chainsaw Carving." I scrolled through photos of bears carved from stumps, eagles with wingspans of 10 feet, intricate benches hewn from single logs. It was incredible. The artists were transforming dead wood into something amazing. And then it hit me. It wasn't a light bulb moment. It was a full-blown lightning strike, a chemical explosion in my brain that sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated adrenaline through my entire body. I scrambled for the HOA letter, my hands shaking slightly. I read the key sentence over and over again. "You are hereby required to have the tree professionally removed." Removed. It was the vaguest of terms. It didn't say cut down and hauled away. It didn't say ground into mulch. It just said removed. What if the tree ceased to exist? What if it became something else entirely? What if it became art? My fingers flew across the keyboard. I pulled up the full Harmony Meadows HOA covenant, a 300-page PDF document of pure, soul-crushing boredom. I used the search function. I typed in sculpture. Nothing. Statue. Nothing. Art. Nothing. There were dozens of rules about lawn gnomes, pink flamingos and decorative fountains, but there was absolutely nothing in the bylaws that prevented a resident from commissioning a 20-foot-tall piece of art in their front yard, provided it was structurally sound. A manic grin spread across my face. This was it. This was the loophole. I wouldn't remove the tree. I would transform it. Carol wanted me to fix my aesthetic blight? Fine. I'd give her aesthetics. I would turn her symbol of my non-compliance into a towering monument of my malicious compliance. I went back to the search bar and typed, "chainsaw artist near me." The first few results were boring, but then I saw it. A website that looked like it had been designed in 1998, complete with flashing text and a background of repeating wood grain. The name of the business was Chuck's Wood Wonders. The gallery was a glorious collection of oddities. There was a life-sized Sasquatch playing a banjo. There was a mermaid that looked suspiciously like Dolly Parton. There was a 6-foot-tall squirrel holding a giant acorn. This was my guy. This was the artist who would understand my vision. I clicked on the contact page. The war wasn't over. I had just found my nuclear option. 2 days later, a vehicle pulled up to my curb that could only be described as a force of nature. It was a Ford F-250 from an era when trucks were made of pure iron and unfiltered fury. It was rusted in places, dented in others, and coated in a fine layer of sawdust that seemed permanently bonded to the paint. It sounded like a rock tumbler full of angry badgers. A mountain of a man emerged from the driver's side. He had to be 6'5", with shoulders as broad as a doorway and a magnificent, untamed beard that could have comfortably housed a family of squirrels through a harsh winter. He wore a flannel shirt, steel-toed boots, and an expression of serene indifference. This, I knew, had to be Chainsaw Chuck. He ambled over to me, wiping his hand on his jeans before offering it. His grip was like being shaken by a friendly bear trap. "Leo?" he rumbled. His voice was a low bass note that seemed to vibrate in my chest. "Chuck, thanks for coming out," I said, feeling suddenly small and clean-shaven. Chuck said nothing. His eyes went straight to the oak tree. He walked a slow circle around it, his gaze analytical. He knocked on the trunk with a knuckle the size of a walnut. The sound was a solid, satisfying thunk. He grunted, a sound that could have meant anything from "this is perfect" to "this will explode if I touch it." "So," I began nervously, pulling out the sketch I had spent the previous night drawing. "Here's what I was thinking." I unrolled the piece of paper. It was a crude but detailed drawing of my vision. A 20-foot totem pole. "I want it to tell a story," I explained, my voice gaining confidence as I laid out my plan of attack. "At the very bottom, right here, I want a figure. A woman. Stern-looking. Maybe in a pantsuit, holding a clipboard and pointing an accusatory finger." Chuck peered at the drawing, then looked at me, a single eyebrow raised. He didn't question it. "Okay," I continued, pointing up the sketch. "Above her, a series of animals, but they all have to look annoyed, like they're being hassled. Here's a raccoon rolling its eyes. Here's a blue jay looking like it's screaming at her, and right here," I pointed to a key detail. "This is a squirrel, and I want him to be, well, flipping the bird, a tiny defiant squirrel middle finger." I looked at Chuck, expecting him to laugh or tell me I was insane. He just stroked his beard, his expression unreadable. "And at the very top," I finished, "an eagle, looking off into the distance. Majestic. Free, symbolizing escape from, well, from all this. I gestured vaguely at the perfect, harmonious neighborhood around us. Chuck was silent for a long, heavy moment. He looked from my crude drawing to the magnificent dead tree, then back to the drawing. I held my breath. He finally looked at me, a glint of what might have been amusement in his deep-set eyes. "Ma'am at the bottom looks like she's got a problem with unsanctioned bird feeders," he rumbled. I broke into a wide grin. "She does. She has a problem with everything." He nodded slowly. "I can do that," he said. "Price is reasonable. Cash is better." The price he quoted was less than half of what the corporate guys wanted, and a fraction of that would go towards creating something glorious instead of just a pile of wood chips. "You're hired," I said, feeling a wave of triumphant glee wash over me. "When can you start?" Chuck looked up at the sun. "Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock sharp." The next morning, the serene quiet of Harmony Meadows was shattered. At precisely 8 o'clock a.m., the air was ripped apart by the roar of a high-powered two-stroke engine as Chuck's primary chainsaw, a beast named Bertha, bit into the bark of the dead oak. The sound was apocalyptic. It was glorious. I set up a lawn chair on my porch, a fresh mug of coffee in hand, and settled in to watch the show. This was better than television. Wood chips, great beautiful arcs of them, flew through the air like wooden snow. The smell of freshly cut oak filled the neighborhood. Chuck worked with a surprising grace, his massive frame moving around the tree, deftly peeling away the outer layers of bark, his saw a blur of controlled violence. Curtains twitched in the houses around me. My neighbor Dave, a perpetually nervous accountant, shuffled over to his fence. "Leo, what in God's name is going on?" he whisper-shouted, as if a lower volume could hide from the chainsaw's deafening song. "Morning, Dave," I yelled back cheerfully. "Just some home improvement. The HOA wanted the tree gone, so I'm having it artistically deconstructed." Dave's eyes went wide. He looked from the tree to me, a slow grin spreading across his face. "You're a madman," he said, shaking his head in a mixture of terror and admiration. "Carol is going to have an aneurysm." He gave me a quick thumbs up before scurrying back inside. It took less than an hour for the Queen herself to make an appearance. Carol Perkins's silver Lexus sedan screeched to a halt at the curb. She emerged from the car, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Her powder blue pantsuit from the meeting had been replaced by a militant-looking beige one. She marched up my driveway like a general leading a charge. Chuck, bless his heart, was completely engrossed in his work and didn't notice her until she was 10 feet away, screaming to be heard over the engine. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked. I stood up from my lawn chair, a pleasant smile fixed on my face. "Good morning, Carol. Beautiful day, isn't it?" "This noise is a violation of the Nuisance Ordinance Section 9, she yelled, pointing a trembling finger at Chuck. "Oh, I don't think so," I said, projecting my voice. "I checked. The noise ordinance doesn't kick in until 9 p.m. We've got a solid 11 hours of daylight left to work with." "You were instructed to remove this tree, not vandalize it." I took a sip of my coffee. "I am removing it. I'm removing the dead tree part and replacing it with art. It's a process. Chuck here is a true artisan. You can't rush genius, Carol." At that moment, as if on cue, Chuck killed the chainsaw. The sudden ringing silence was more shocking than the noise. He pulled up his safety glasses, his face covered in a fine sheen of sweat and sawdust. He looked at Carol, then at me, then back at Carol. He gave her a slow, deliberate nod. Then, without a word, he pulled the cord on Bertha. The engine roared back to life, louder and more defiant than before, completely drowning out whatever sputtering retort Carol had been formulating. She stood there for a moment, her mouth opening and closing uselessly, before turning on her heel and stomping back to her Lexus. It was the most satisfying thing I had ever witnessed. Carol, having been defeated by decibels, resorted to the ultimate weapon in the suburban arsenal, calling the cops. About an hour later, a squad car rolled slowly down the street and pulled up behind Chuck's rust bucket truck. 2 officers got out. They didn't look rushed. They looked bored. This was clearly not a high-priority call. Carol was waiting for them on the sidewalk, practically vibrating with indignation. She launched into a frantic, high-pitched explanation, pointing at my house, at Chuck, at the partially carved tree. Chuck killed the engine again. I walked down the driveway to meet the officers. One was older, with a thick mustache and a weary look in his eyes. His name tag read Miller. The other was younger, fitter, and looked like he was desperately trying to maintain a professional demeanor. His tag read Rodriguez. "Morning, officers," I said calmly. "Is there a problem?" Miller sighed, the sound of a man who had seen too many petty neighborhood disputes. "Sir, we got a call about a disturbance. Ma'am here says you're creating a public nuisance and destroying property." Carol chimed in. "He was ordered by the Homeowners Association to remove that tree, and instead he's hired this hooligan to deface it." I maintained my cheerful smile. "Not at all, officer. I'm a homeowner, improving my property during legal designated working hours, and I am, in fact, complying with the HOA's order." I pulled the original letter from my back pocket. I had started carrying it with me like a talisman, and handed it to Officer Miller. "As you can see, it says the tree must be professionally removed. I've hired a professional. This is Chuck. He's removing it." Miller read the letter, his lips twitching. He handed it to Rodriguez, who read it and failed to suppress a snort. "So, let me get this straight," Miller said, looking from the letter to the half-carved totem. "She told you to get rid of the tree, and you're getting rid of it. By turning it into a giant statue?" "Totem pole," I corrected him gently. "It's a commentary on suburban ennui." Miller's mustache twitched again, hiding a definite smile. He turned to Carol. "Ma'am, he's on his own property. It's 11:30 a.m. on a weekday. The noise level is permissible for construction or landscaping work. He's not breaking any laws." "But the bylaws!" Carol sputtered. "The HOA bylaws are a civil matter, ma'am," Rodriguez said, his voice flat and practiced. "That's between you, him, and the courts. It's not a police issue. As long as he stops making noise by 9 p.m., he's within his rights." They handed me back my letter. Miller gave the towering, half-formed sculpture a long look. "Looks like you're making some real progress there," he said with a nod. As they walked back to their car, I heard him mutter to his partner, "Definitely beats the cat-in-a-tree call from yesterday." They got in their car and drove away, leaving Carol standing on the sidewalk, utterly defeated. She stared at me, her eyes shooting daggers that could have peeled bark. I gave her a little wave. She made a sound like a deflating tire and got in her car, peeling away from the curb. This was a major victory. I had used the law, the actual law, not her little book of suggestions, against her. I felt powerful. I felt invincible. I looked at Chuck, who was already pulling the cord on his chainsaw. He caught my eye and gave me a thumbs up. The symphony of spite resumed, echoing through the now harmonious meadows. For 5 glorious days, the roar of chainsaws was the soundtrack of Willow Creek Lane. Chuck was a maestro. He started with the big, powerful saws to rough out the shapes, then moved to smaller, more delicate tools for the details. It was a messy, noisy, and utterly captivating process. The pile of wood chips in my yard grew to the size of a small car. The neighborhood was divided. The staunch pro-Carol camp would glare as they drove by, while others would give me subtle nods of support or slow down to get a better look at the emerging forms. Then, on the 5th day, the noise stopped. The silence that descended was profound. Chuck spent the afternoon sanding down the rough edges and applying a weatherproof stain and vibrant paints. By the time the sun began to set, he was packing his tools into his truck. He had finished. I walked out to the curb with 2 cold beers and handed one to him. We stood there for a moment, side by side, admiring our creation. It was magnificent. 20 feet of solid oak, transformed. At the base, the figure of a woman in a beige pantsuit scowled at the world, her finger pointing accusingly, her face a perfect caricature of judgmental fury. The likeness to Carol Perkins was, to be frank, uncanny. Above her, the eye-rolling raccoon seemed to be reacting directly to her, and the screaming blue jay looked ready to dive-bomb her hairdo. Higher still was the squirrel. Its tiny, carved wooden paw was raised in the most glorious, unmistakable one-fingered salute I had ever seen. And at the very top, an eagle. Wings partially spread, stared out over the rooftops of Harmony Meadows, the very picture of freedom and defiance. "She's got her mother's eyes," Chuck rumbled, taking a long drink of his beer and nodding at the Carol figure. "Chuck, it's more beautiful than I ever imagined," I said, my voice thick with awe. "You're not a chainsaw artist. You're a chainsaw poet." He gave a rare, small smile, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Just carving wood." I paid him the remainder of what I owed him, plus a hefty bonus. He got into his truck, gave a final nod to the totem pole, and rumbled off down the street, leaving me alone with my masterpiece. The reaction was immediate. My neighbor Dave came out onto his porch and gave me a slow, reverent round of applause. A car full of teenagers stopped in the middle of the street, windows down, phones out, howling with laughter. They took a dozen pictures before driving off. Within hours, I knew, my totem pole would be on social media. Over the next few days, it became a local phenomenon. People who didn't even live in Harmony Meadows started driving through for a look. They'd slow down, point, and laugh. Someone on the local neighborhood Facebook group dubbed it the Totem of Petty, and the name stuck. It had become a landmark. Some of the older, more curmudgeonly residents were appalled, but a surprising number were secretly delighted. It was the first interesting thing that had happened in this neighborhood in years. It was a splash of vibrant, irreverent color in a world of beige. I had started this as a joke, a way to get back at a petty tyrant. But standing there, looking up at the scowling face and the defiant squirrel, I felt a strange sense of pride. I hadn't just fought back. I had created something. It was weird, it was ridiculous, and it was entirely mine. I had made my mark on Harmony Meadows, for better or for worse. The good feeling lasted for about a week. I knew Carol wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. She hadn't just lost the battle. She'd been publicly humiliated. Her monument stood in my yard for all to see. I was waiting for the other shoe to drop, and when it did, it came via certified mail. The envelope was from a law firm, Dewey, Cheatham and Howe, a name so cliché I had to check to make sure it wasn't a joke. It wasn't. The letter inside was 5 pages long, printed on intimidatingly thick legal bond, and it was signed by a partner at the firm. The friendly, passive-aggressive tone of the initial HOA notices was gone. This was all-out war. It was a formal cease and desist order. The letter accused me of a litany of bylaw violations. The totem pole was an unapproved structural modification. It was a violation of the rule against lawn ornaments exceeding 36 inches in height. It was, and this was my favorite part, a visual nuisance that detracts from the harmonious aesthetic of the community. It went on to state that the carving of the tree had created excessive noise and debris, and that the final structure was a deliberate and malicious effigy designed to harass and intimidate a member of the HOA board, which they claimed could be grounds for a civil harassment suit. The letter demanded the immediate removal of the offensive structure within 10 days. If I failed to comply, the HOA would seek a court order to have it removed at my expense. Furthermore, they were retroactively applying the $50 per day fine from the date of the original notice and adding new fines for the structural violations, bringing my total current debt to the HOA to something just over $3,000. And of course, they would be putting a lien on my house and suing me for all associated legal fees. I read the letter 3 times, the cold, hard reality of the situation finally sinking in. This had escalated far beyond a neighborhood spat. They were threatening to ruin me financially, to potentially take my house. For a moment, a genuine pang of fear shot through me. The humor of the situation evaporated, replaced by the metallic taste of panic. Maybe I had gone too far. Maybe I had poked the bear one too many times. Maybe it was time to surrender, to chop the thing down and beg for mercy. I folded the letter, my hands trembling slightly. My eyes drifted out the front window to the totem pole, standing proud and defiant in the afternoon sun. I saw the scowling face of Carolyn Wood, the eye-rolling raccoon, and that magnificent, heroic squirrel, its tiny finger raised against the world. They had tried to bully me, to intimidate me, to bury me in rules and regulations. This totem pole wasn't just a joke anymore. It was a principle. The fear was replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I thought of Carol's smug smile at the meeting, of the corporate drone trying to charge me $5,000, of the condescending legal threats. I looked out the window at the magnificent, scowling face of Carolyn Wood and remembered why I did it. The fear was replaced by a simple thought: bring it on. The weekend was a blur of caffeine and legalese. The threat of lawsuits had a way of focusing the mind. I downloaded the full 300-page Harmony Meadows HOA covenant, the document I had only skimmed before, and printed it out. I sat at my kitchen table with a stack of highlighters and a pot of coffee, determined to read every last soul-crushing word. It was a journey into the heart of suburban darkness. There were rules for everything. The acceptable color range for garden hoses, earth tones only. The maximum height of blades of grass, 4 inches. The number of potted plants allowed on a front porch, 3, with a maximum diameter of 18 inches. It was a document written by people who had looked at the world and thought, "This is entirely too interesting. Let's regulate it into a coma." I was hours into my quest, my brain numb from endless clauses and subsections when I found it. Buried deep in a section about property modifications, tucked away like a hidden gem, was Bylaw 11, Section 7. Cultural and religious expressions, Asai. leaned closer, my heart starting to beat a little faster. The bylaw was clearly written by a lawyer terrified of a discrimination lawsuit. It was a masterpiece of protective language. I read it aloud to myself, my voice a reverent whisper. To foster a community of inclusivity and respect for diverse traditions, exemptions from standard aesthetic regulations, as outlined in Article 7, may be granted for objects, displays, or structures of recognized cultural, artistic, or religious significance. My eyes scanned down the page, looking for the catch. There had to be a catch. Approval for such exemptions is subject to review by the Architectural Control Committee to ensure the structure does not pose a direct public safety hazard. However, the committee may not deny an exemption based on the object's theme, origin, or the beliefs it represents. I slammed my hand on the table, a wild laugh escaping my lips. This was it. This was the silver bullet. They couldn't deny it based on its theme or the beliefs it represents. It was a loophole big enough to drive Chuck's pickup truck through. Carol had built her entire kingdom on the unyielding foundation of her rulebook. And she had, in her infinite, paranoid wisdom, baked in the recipe for her own destruction. She had given me the weapon I needed to win the war. A new plan began to form in my mind, a plan so audacious, so ridiculous, that it just might work. The totem pole was not just a monument to spite anymore. It was about to become a sacred object. On Monday morning, I didn't call a lawyer. I went online, and for the low price of $49.99, I officially registered a new religious organization. I called it the First Church of the Sacred Oak. My official filing listed its core tenets: a belief in the spiritual power of creative defiance, a reverence for nature, especially defiant dead trees, and a deep-seated philosophical opposition to beige. Our primary deity was the Great Splinter, an all-powerful entity who represented the universe's tendency to push back against oppressive order. Our central, most holy artifact was, of course, the 20-foot totem pole in my front yard, a sacred icon depicting the eternal struggle between the free-spirited creatures of the wood, the animals, and the forces of bureaucratic dogma, the scowling lady at the bottom. I printed out the official-looking certificate of incorporation, framed it, and then I called the local news. I pitched them a story. Local man's religious freedom threatened by homeowners association. In a slow news week, it was gold. A reporter and a cameraman showed up that afternoon. I gave them a heartfelt, completely straight-faced interview on my front lawn, with the totem pole looming majestically behind me. All I wanted was to live in peace, I said to the camera, my voice filled with manufactured sincerity. But when the HOA threatened my sacred tree, a tree that has stood on this land for generations, I had a revelation. The Great Splinter spoke to me, not in a whisper, but through the roar of the chainsaw. This totem, I gestured dramatically, isn't just wood. It's a testament to the divine struggle against arbitrary rules and excessive landscaping fees. The reporter, a young woman who was trying very hard not to smile, asked about my congregation. We are a small but growing faith, I said solemnly. Our services are held every Sunday, weather permitting. We encourage silent meditation on the nature of spite and the importance of squirrels. Bring a lawn chair. I also showed them the legal threats from the HOA and my official certificate for the First Church of the Sacred Oak. The story aired on the 6 o'clock news. By the next morning, Totem Pole Guy was a local viral sensation. The news station's Facebook post had hundreds of comments, almost all of them siding with me and roasting the HOA. I was the quirky underdog fighting the big, bad corporation. Carol Perkins, though not named directly, was painted as the villainous persecutor of a new and fascinating religion. The final nail in her coffin was a petition I had started circulating. It wasn't about religion. It simply asked the HOA to designate the totem pole an official piece of community art. Dozens of my neighbors, people who had been silently cheering me on, signed it. They were tired of Carol's reign. The rebellion was real. The public relations nightmare was too much for the HOA to handle. Faced with a brewing internal revolt, terrible press, and the very real, very expensive threat of a religious discrimination lawsuit, the board convened an emergency session. I wasn't there, of course, but I can imagine the scene. The stale coffee, the panicked looks, and the HOA's lawyer advising them to cut their losses and run. 2 days later, a plain white envelope appeared in my mailbox. No certified mail this time. Inside was a letter from the HOA. It was short and to the point. All fines were formally rescinded. All legal action was dropped. And in light of community feedback and a review of the bylaws, the structure at 124 Willow Creek Lane was officially granted a permanent exemption as a work of recognized cultural and artistic significance. The letter was signed by the HOA vice president. Carol's name was nowhere to be seen. I had won. That evening, I was on my porch with a celebratory beer when Dave called over from his yard. "You did it, man," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "You actually did it. You're a legend. My wife wants to leave a small offering at the base of the totem. Is a zucchini okay?" I smiled, taking a long, satisfying sip. "The Great Splinter prefers offerings of high-quality craft beer, Dave, but it will accept the zucchini." Life in Harmony Meadows is different now. The totem pole still stands, a beloved local landmark. Carol Perkins is still on the board, but her power is broken. She hasn't made eye contact with me since. The neighborhood feels a little looser, a little more human. Last week I saw someone put a plastic pink flamingo on their lawn. It's still there. A few months ago, I affixed a small, discreet brass plaque to the base of the totem pole, right beneath the scowling face of my nemesis. It has just one line, a new motto for our slightly more harmonious meadow. "In harmony, a little chaos is a beautiful thing."